you guys. Well, it's New Year's Eve. It's the cusp of 2025, and I decided I was just going to go ahead and do this thing. Now, I don't normally do this kind of year-end ranking thing for a couple reasons. One, I'm usually too lazy or too busy, like I don't have time to do it. And two, I don't usually see enough new horror movies like in any given year to kind of justify making a list like this. But as most of you know, 2024 was a shockingly kick-ass year for horror movies, and I ended up seeing so many great ones that I honestly had no problem at all. This was going to be a top 10, but there were so many in there that I liked that I didn't want to leave off that I was like, well, shit, I might as well just make it a top 20. And there were like some that I still like had to leave off. But yeah, so I didn't really have any problem coming up with like 20 really, really good movies. So I figured, why not? I'll break with tradition and discuss my 20 favorite horror movies of the year. I'm sure most of you guys, if you're, into horror at all, will have probably seen most of these, the ones that I picked, but I'm also kind of hoping that maybe I can recommend a couple in there that maybe flew under the radar, because there's a couple in there that I actually didn't hear about until later. So, hopefully you have that experience also. Now, keep in mind that although I did see a lot more new horror films this year than I normally would, there are still kind of a few that were sort of buzzworthy, like In a Violent Nature, Smile 2, A Quiet Place Day 1, maybe Arcadian, Night Swim, like movies like that, that I didn't get to see yet. So I won't be commenting on them one way or the other, obviously, because I haven't seen them. So don't get upset that they're not on the list. I just haven't seen them. That's all. Now, this top 20 list is kind of roughly ranked in the order that I liked them, sort of. But all of them are very good to outstanding, and I wouldn't hesitate to recommend any one of them if it sounds like something you would like. I also feel obliged to point out that I would actually never be so bold as to call these the best horror films of 2024. These were just the ones that I personally enjoyed the most. So, if you feel the need to argue with me about my very, very subjective opinions about these movies, maybe just take a deep breath and reconsider your life choices before you whip out your angry little typing finger. So let's get on with the list. So, Azrael. I actually did a long video review of this one, so I will try not to repeat myself too much here. But this was a very compelling kind of post-apocalyptic horror movie. Samara Weaving is in it, and she stars as someone who escapes from a cult whose members believe that talking is a sin, and thus all of them have removed all their own vocal cords. So the story is actually biblical. It's set after the rapture, the rapture was a real thing that happened. And it has a lot of religious symbolism in it. And I kind of feel like the understanding of that religious symbolism goes a long way toward appreciating the story that they're telling. Keep in mind, too, that this movie has almost no dialogue at all. And so you really have to pay really close attention to body language, facial expressions, and various background details to kind of get the gist of what's happening. But I kind of feel like if you like horror movies that are set in end of the world type situations, that have, a lot of violence, maybe some creatures that are cannibals, and sort of religious weirdness, then this would probably be right up your alley. So this one's called Mads. And this is a French film, and this one actually kind of made a big splash when it debuted at Fantastic Fest. And it's pretty easy to see why this was kind of such a success, aside from the fact that it was shot in one continuous take, which is pretty incredible enough in itself. It also has some really, really good acting performances and this kind of real chaotic energy to it that sort of propels the story forward, toward this, bleak, horrifying conclusion. It's actually the feature film debut of the director David Moreau, who was also the guy who wrote the screenplay for the excellent 2006 film Youll, or Them as it's called in English. So at first in this movie, we're following a young man named Romain, and he just turned 18. Now, his wealthy dad, I'm assuming he's wealthy because they have a really nice house, his dad is out of town, and Romain wants to do his birthday upright, right? So to that end, we see him first at his drug dealer's apartment, picking up some drugs for the night. He's actually, after that, he's going to go swing by and get his sort of girlfriend, whose name is Anais, and they're going to a friend's party after that. But as Romain is tooling down the road in his dad's snazzy convertible, he actually kind of drops a cigarette on himself and has to pull over to put it out. And as he stopped, a very fucked up looking woman like emerges from somewhere and gets into the car. Now, her head is all wrapped up in bandages. She's kind of like I said, she's kind of fucked up, looking injured or whatever. And she isn't really answering the questions that he puts to her. Roman actually does not want to call the cops because he's high as balls because he sampled some of the drugs before he left the apartment. You know how it goes. So he decides that he's just going to take this poor woman to the nearest hospital and just drop her off and everything will be fine. Now, the woman is also carrying like a radio or some kind of thing, or like a walkie-talkie kind of thing. And on that, we hear that she has ostensibly like escaped from some nearby facility of some kind. Now, Romain is still planning on dumping her off at the emergency room, but then she kind of complicates matters by repeatedly stabbing herself in the neck, which kind of sprays blood all over the car and all over her ostensible savior. So now, obviously in a complete panic, Roman kind of shifts gears and he drives home with what he thinks is now a dead body in his car. So he parks in the garage, closes it up, and he tries to figure out what to do because he's freaking out. He goes in the shower and washes all the blood off, and then he tries to act normal on the phone with his dad because his dad are like, "What are you doing? Do you have my car?" Blah, 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 like all this other kind of stuff. So after all that, like he goes back into the garage only to find out that the woman has disappeared. And then after this point, when he still doesn't know where this woman toddled off to, Romain is essentially shanghaied by Anais and all his friends into going to the party as they had planned to do earlier. But as the night goes on, it's clear that he's not really feeling all that well, and events slowly begin to spiral out of control. So this is, in essence, a zombie film, but it's kind of more in the infection style, like a la 28 Days Later, rather than the walking corpse type. The story actually progresses in a sort of chain or like a relay race type of thing, because we're kind of latching onto new characters and leaving other ones behind, like as we just hop from character to character. But the action really never stops moving forward as the infection like starts spreading like among this group of friends. Interestingly, I was reading a review of this over at RogerEbert.com, which was written by Brian Tallarico, and he called this film George A. Romero's Run Lola Run. So I was like, wow, that's a really good description of this movie. So if that sounds like your thing, then you probably want to get on this one right away, because you'll probably really dig it. Now, The Devil's Bath is another one that I did its own review on. But if you don't want to go watch that or, whatever, then I'll just kind of give a little brief recap. So this movie's in German, and its original title is, and please forgive me because I don't speak German, obviously, but it's Des Teufels Bad, I guess. So this is actually a historical drama that has some horror elements to it. It's kind of somewhat based on real events. So it's set in the mid-18th century. And we're following a young woman named Agnes who moves to the village of her new husband, whose name is Wolf. Now, shortly after this, she begins suffering from some kind of melancholy or depression, partly caused, or mostly caused, I guess, by her situation. Like, she has a really overbearing mother-in-law. Like, her husband won't have sex with her, like, so they can have a kid. Like, he's possibly closeted, they kind of imply. They've gone into crippling debt, like, to buy this house. And she's still kind of seen as an outsider in the village. She doesn't know anybody, and she's far from her family and everything like that. So, because of this depression, she starts to become obsessed with another village woman who previously threw her baby off a waterfall and then confessed to the murder, like, immediately so she could get executed. Now, this woman's headless body is on display at this kind of shrine situation in the forest, I'm assuming, like, as an example and a moral lesson to others. So the movie actually delves into the real practice in this part of the world in this era, whereby women suffering from, like, mental health issues would commit a murder and then confess so they would be absolved of their sin before they were executed. Now, this was actually done because suicide was considered a greater sin than murder. So women who wanted to take their own lives would kind of exploit this loophole to make sure that their souls went to heaven. And they would usually kill children, which is kind of fucked up, but that's what happened. I mean, it's a pretty tragic and horrifying bit of history that doesn't really get much attention. So it was actually fascinating to see a horror movie or a quasi-horror movie like based around it. Like, don't get me wrong, The Devil's Bath isn't a traditional horror film by any means, but it really deals with some really awful, bleak subject matter and also has some pretty grotesque imagery in it. So I feel like it totally qualifies. So, Abigail. This one was a very fun, very gory, kind of comedic kind of movie. It was directed by Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillett, who are the same guys behind the awesome 2019 movie Ready or Not, which also had Samara Weaving, who I've already talked about. There was kind of a lot of discussion in the horror community about this movie, like over whether the trailer should have revealed the big twist. And I'm going to say, I admit it probably would have been like a more satisfying experience going into this blind, like without knowing. But, you know, the producers clearly believed that more people would go see this movie if they knew that it was a vampire movie up front. And honestly, I guess they were right, because this movie did pretty well, like with both critics and audiences. I would have loved to have watched it without knowing that she was a vampire, but overall, it didn't really ruin the movie for me. It was still like a really good time. So if you haven't seen it, the story is about kind of a group of a half dozen criminals, and they've been assembled under the auspices of this kind of mysterious dude named Lambert to pull off a particularly tricky job. So this heist involves kidnapping the daughter of an unnamed, very wealthy individual for ransom and keeping her prisoner in this spooky mansion until kind of the payment can be negotiated, right? Now, the abduction actually goes off without a hitch. A couple of the team members are kind of not cool with kidnapping a kid, but they're like, hey, it's a lot of money, so they're going to go along with it. And for the first bit of the movie, we're just kind of watching the criminals interact with each other in sort of engaging ways, because none of them really knew each other previously, and they all have pretty intriguing secrets and backstories and stuff like that. But soon enough, shit starts to go sideways when it's revealed that not only is the little girl, whose name is Abigail, obviously, the daughter of one of the most feared figures in the criminal underworld, but she's also a very powerful vampire whose pretty much favorite thing is messing with her hapless captors before tearing them limb from limb. So this movie was just a blast. I mean, it's really entertaining. It's just gloriously bloody. It's, pretty hilarious. Each of the criminals was actually a really interesting character in his or her own right, and their back and forth was a big part of the movie's charm, I thought, as was the inherent humor in watching a gang of kind of cynical, hardened gangsters getting their asses kicked by a super strong, blood-sucking child. So yeah, this was just a good time all around. So You'll Never Find Me. This was another movie that I already talked about at length on its own video. So, if you want a more in-depth take on it, then, go watch that video. But for everybody else, here's just a Cliff's Notes version. So You'll Never Find Me is actually an Australian horror thriller that really makes the most of its one location and two characters. I mean, that's pretty much it. I feel like most of the suspense is generated kind of just through the interactions of the two leads and the ambiguous nature of the situation that's unfolding. And the third act really does kind of tie everything together really nicely with some really, really creepy and almost kind of surreal visuals. So we have this kind of loner guy named Patrick, and he lives in this sort of isolated trailer park, in the back end of Beyond in Australia somewhere. Now, one night during this kind of weird storm, a woman who's actually only credited as the visitor pounds on his door, she's asking for a ride into town, and it's raining and all this other kind of shit. Now, between this terrible weather and Patrick's kind of iffy vehicle, it seems that this ride is not really on the cards, right? So the visitor comes into the trailer to wait out the storm, and she's kind of hoping that she'll eventually be able to walk to the payphone, once the weather conditions get better. There then ensues a series of very strange, extremely tense exchanges between the two of them, where as you're watching it, you're not entirely sure what's going on or what's going to happen next. Patrick appears extremely sketchy, and so we're kind of worried on the visitor's behalf, because obviously she's a young woman and this dude, he seems kind of creepy. So you're just kind of oh shit, we've seen how that's going to go. But then at times it kind of seems like the visitor might be hiding some shit too. So we're not really sure if our expectations are kind of being fucked with in some way. I feel like the best thing about this movie is this kind of tightrope that it walks while these two kind of possibly unreliable characters are kind of pursuing their own goals and purposes, which we don't know. So I feel like fans of kind of more action-oriented horror might not have the patience to sit through a movie whose runtime is almost entirely comprised of two people talking. I mean, this could easily be a stage play, which I think I said in my longer review. But I thought this was really good, really suspenseful, really eerie. And it really demonstrated quite handily that you don't need a big budget to make a great horror movie. Like, all you really need is a really good script, two really good actors, and just like a whole bunch of really unsettling atmosphere. So, Longlegs. I feel like this was probably the most divisive film of 2024. And it got a ton of hype that I think a lot of people felt like it didn't really live up to. You know what I mean? It's a weird flick for sure. But I kind of feel like anybody that's familiar with Oz Perkins' other movies, like The Black Coat's Daughter or I'm the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, I kind of feel like if you liked those, you'll probably like this too, because it has that real cold, like off-putting kind of vibe that he's known for. But this movie is more filtered through like a 90s police procedural kind of lens, almost like a Silence of the Lambs type situation. I really liked it, and evidently lots of other people did too, because it's still Neon's highest grossing film as far as I'm aware. I mean, it pulled in $127 million on a less than $10 million budget, which is astonishing. You know what I mean? But on the other hand, I can definitely see why this is not for all tastes, and I can see why some people really didn't like it. So we have Micah Monroe. She was in It Follows and Watcher, and both of those are good if you haven't seen those. She plays Lee Harker, who's this kind of soft-spoken FBI agent who also happens to have kind of low-key psychic powers, kind of. So she's working on this bizarre serial killer case in which the fathers of families like murder their wife and kids and then take their own lives. And this has happened like several times. And then at each of the scenes, there's this coded letter that's signed Longlegs. But it's clear that whoever this Longlegs figure is not the one that's responsible for the crime itself. You know what I'm saying? So law enforcement officers are operating under the assumption that Longlegs is somehow forcing them or like brainwashing the killers into doing the murders. And the murders seem to have some kind of occult or satanic purpose to them. So yeah, this movie takes some pretty strange pathways. It kind of introduces a possible connection between Lee and Longlegs, and also has a very pronounced like supernatural element to it. Nicolas Cage, which is the thing everybody was talking about this, he's the title character, and he's a real standout. He's kind of ridiculous, but like really, really disquieting at the same time. It was quite a performance, and I kind of feel like the juxtaposition of his like really over the top, like peculiar character juxtaposed with Micah Monroe's extremely introverted character, it kind of makes for a real interesting dynamic. Now, it is slow moving in parts, I will give you that. But I admit I kind of vibed with this kind of chilly 90s aesthetic that it had with all this like wood paneling, and it's a vibe, you know what I mean? I actually wouldn't mind, I've only seen it once, but I actually wouldn't mind a second viewing of this, because I kind of feel like there's a lot of stuff in there that you probably need a second viewing to pick up on. But like I said, I can see why this one was divisive, but I kind of dug it. So Maxine. I was a huge fan of Ty West's previous two films in the series, obviously, X and Pearl, both of which came out in 2022. So I was very eagerly anticipating this third movie, which follows Maxine Minx like several years after the events of X. Now, I didn't love it as much as the other two movies, but it's still really, really solid. It felt like it used like the framework of an 80s erotic thriller kind of crossbred with a satanic panic kind of angle to go deeper into Maxine's character. So it's set in 1985, and Maxine has become quite a successful porn star, and she also has a sideline like working in a peep show. But, true to her nature, she wants more than just being famous in the adult film world. She wants real Hollywood stardom. So to that end, she wants to start climbing up the ladder of fame or whatever in real movies. So she auditions for like this cheesy horror film called The Puritan 2. And the director of this film, whose name is Elizabeth Bender, kind of takes a shine to her, admiring her, quite substantial acting chops, as well as the kind of controversial edge she'll bring to the film. I kind of feel like this was maybe a sideways reference to Marilyn Chambers being in one of David Cronenberg's movies, but I could be totally wrong about that. At the same time all this is going on, though, there's kind of a series of disturbing murders occurring around Hollywood, and the victims all have some connection to Maxine, and all of them are like branded with satanic symbols, like pentagrams and shit. Now, Maxine herself becomes embroiled with this really shady, like, private investigator named John Labatt, who's played by Kevin Bacon, and he seems to want to nail her for her part in the mass murder that occurred in X. Like, she was the one responsible for killing the old people, you know? Now, I think, like, Maxine is a tad uneven tonally, but I really enjoyed it a lot. I mean, Mia Goth is badass, as always. Kevin Bacon was also a big highlight in this movie for me. Like, his character that he played, it's just, he came across with, like, just such a weird, like, appealing loathsomeness, but that you couldn't really help but love him. He was just fucking great. The look of the film was also, like, really vibrant and cool, and I kind of loved the veneer of, like, 80s LA sleaze that kind of permeated the whole movie. You know, yes, it's an homage to thrillers from that era, and, you know, some people have accused it of just being a pastiche, but I mean, even if that's the case, it's still a goddamn good one. So Terrifier 3. Slashers are not my favorite subgenre of horror, but when the mood strikes me, I do really love a good one. And honestly, if you're into gore at all, you cannot go wrong with any of Damian Leone's independent Terrifier franchise. Like I said, these are just written and directed by one dude, and they're just independent all the way, and you have to fucking admire that. You know, especially considering how fucking successful they've become. I mean, Art the Clown seems to have achieved horror villain immortality like overnight. Like, it seemed to happen like really quickly, and I totally understand how that happened. I kind of feel like killer clowns in general are pretty played out, obviously, but the guy that plays Art the Clown, David Howard Thornton, he has just this real silent movie kind of physicality and these theatrics that he used, like in his facial expressions and stuff like that, and it really makes the character into something special, like something different. And I think the reason that a lot of people respond to that character is just how much this supernatural clown clearly enjoys killing the shit out of people. So in this third Terrifier movie, it's set at Christmas time. And Art was actually decapitated, if you remember, at the end of the second movie. But that, you know, he doesn't let headlessness cramp his style, like going into this movie. So his headless ass actually heads for the asylum, which houses the now possessed Victoria Hayes, who eventually gives birth to Art's new head, because why not, that he just kind of sticks on there with duct tape or whatever. And then the two of them kind of become sidekicks as they kind of go on this killing spree. Now, before they go on said killing spree, though, they actually go into kind of stasis for 5 years. I'm not real clear on why that was. I thought it was just because they were waiting for the final girl from the last movie, Sienna Shaw, to be released from the mental hospital. But, you know, I don't know. Why couldn't they just not get up until... I'm not really sure. But they went into stasis for 5 years, and we're just rolling with it. So while Sienna is still, like, dealing with the traumatic experience of all the shit that happened, all the people that got murdered in the second movie, Art and Victoria go on this rampage, which includes, you know, killing entire families with an axe, blowing up a bunch of children with a bomb in a mall, like at the Santa thing, forcing rats through a tube into a woman's mouth, like down her throat and everything. And in my favorite scene of the movie, slicing a dude in half long ways with a chainsaw, like ass crack first. Also had some bonus scrotum mutilation in there for like added flair. So this had just jaw-dropping practical effects, so good. I mean, they're just gleefully disgusting. And honestly, like, the acting performances in this are like miles better than they really need to be. Like, the acting in this is legit, like, really good. So yeah, I kind of feel like this one, I think, I don't know, I might have liked this one the best, but I don't know. I'd have to like watch all the other ones. I might have liked 2 better, I'm not sure. I kind of felt like this one was gorier than 2, but some people disagree with me. I kind of feel like there's more gore set pieces in this one than there was in 2, but I could be remembering that wrong. But yeah, this one also like expands on the, you know, increasingly complicated lore surrounding Art the Clown and Sienna and their relationship with one another. And this one also ends on kind of a fucked up cliffhanger that pretty much all but guarantees a 4th chapter. I mean, they can't just leave it like that, you know what I mean? So, I mean, but to be honest, as much sick fun as this one was, it's like if they want to do a 4th one, fuck yeah, I'll be at the theater to watch it. So Exuma. Now, this is another movie that I did a whole video about. So, if you want, like I said, a longer take on it, you can go watch that. But if you don't, I'll just give like a little brief recap of it. So this is actually a South Korean folk horror film. And it tells the story of a group of like paranormal experts who unwittingly unleash this evil when they're hired to exhume this weird, like mysterious grave of this old man. Now, the movie is quite long by genre standards. And it has like two interrelated halves. Like the first half follows this gang as they actually dig up the grave and then have to deal with the consequences of this, grumpy ghost that emerges. And then the second one actually takes place a few months later and involves like a more ancient spirit that was kind of buried under the first one and then comes out and like starts wreaking havoc on everybody. So I'm going to say this, South Korea, they always fucking kill it. You know what I mean? This was pretty much a masterpiece, really, along the same lines as The Wailing from 2016. So if you liked that one, then I would definitely recommend this one as well. So Red Rooms. I had entirely missed the boat on this film. I had not even heard of it until I just randomly happened across quite a small horror channel doing a year-end ranking. Like, she was ranking all the horror movies she'd seen that year, and she happened to mention it. It's actually a French-Canadian film. It's set in Montreal. And I would hesitate to call it a straight horror film. It's more a dark drama with psychological horror elements that also deals with some like real disturbing subject matter. Now, I guess technically it came out in Canada in 2023, but I don't think it got much of a wider release or recognition until later, so I'm still counting it as a 2024 film, sue me. So the first sequence of the movie is kind of detailing the opening arguments in the trial of a dude named Ludovic Chevalier, who is accused of abducting, raping, torturing, and murdering 3 teenage girls for an internet red room, which I think most people know what that is. But if you don't, it's kind of a site where you can go to on the dark web where you can watch like the torture and murder of someone in real time. And kind of sometimes you can also bid on opportunities to give suggestions for various depravities to be inflicted on the victims. So yeah, it's pretty fucked up. Now, one of the people watching this trial is a young woman named Kelly Ann. And she is quite a well-known fashion model. And she also makes some money on the side, like playing online poker. She seems to have like this particular fascination with this case, and seems to be kind of fascinated with the most fucked up corners of the dark web in general. Now, while she's attending the hearing, she meets up with this other girl that's like really obsessed with the case, who's kind of quasi-homeless. And her name is Clementine, or however they pronounce it. I don't remember. Because like I said, this is in French and English, like I said, because it's set in Montreal. Now, Clementine is actually convinced that Ludovic is innocent, and she comes up with all sorts of weird conspiracy theories to justify this belief that she has. Because it turns out that she kind of is in love with him a little bit. Like, she's a little bit off, you know what I mean? Now, these two women kind of strike up a strange friendship. And Kelly Ann lets Clementine like stay at her clearly very expensive apartment while the trial's going on. And she sits there and kind of like listens to Clementine's bizarre defenses of this dude with some bemusement, I guess. Now, through her kind of shady online activities, Kelly Ann has illegally come into possession of the videos of 2 of the victims' murders. The third video has actually like yet to surface. Now, the videos themselves are never shown in the movie. We only hear the horrifying sounding audio and see people watching them and like reacting to them. And I thought this was actually pretty effective because it leaves pretty much everything to your imagination. And what you can imagine is like pretty horrible. So as the story goes on, Kelly Ann starts becoming kind of more and more involved with the case and is eager to get her hands on the third missing video, for reasons which aren't really revealed until later, and maybe not even then, not really entirely. So yeah, I kind of feel like this is more like a dark character study about obsession rather than a traditional horror film, but this one was like almost hypnotic, I want to say. Like, it kind of explores Kelly Ann's really fractured psyche while still keeping her motives largely mysterious. You know what I mean? She was a fascinating protagonist, and the way the actress played her almost like a blank slate, but you could tell there was this very obvious undercurrent of deep mental disturbance like underneath it, and she played it really, really well. So I feel like this one will be a little bit of a sleeper, but I mean, if you like more restrained psychological horror that really doesn't give you any easy answers, then, you know, you might want to seek this one out. So Caddo Lake, this was another movie that kind of plays mostly more like a drama, but has some sort of mind-bendy elements in there that kind of give it a little bit of a science fiction thing. This is another movie that I saw come up on a lot of best of 2024 lists, and I feel like for very good reason. Now, some viewers might be frustrated by the length of time the movie takes to build up the suspense and how it initially like refuses to clarify what's going on like for quite a long while. But for me, that's kind of what made it so involving, because it's just like there was just these little breadcrumbs and you're just like, where is this going? Like, what the fuck is going on? Now, I don't want to spoil too much here, because I would advise going into this movie like pretty much completely cold without any knowledge at all of like what's going to happen. So we're following two seemingly unrelated families living in this kind of rural community along Caddo Lake, which is apparently a real lake that's kind of on the border of Texas and Louisiana. Now, at the beginning of the movie, we see this car accident where a vehicle just plummets off this high bridge like into the lake. Now, the passenger, whose name is Paris Lang, he's able to swim to safety, but the female driver drowns. Now, we then skip ahead 6 years and discover that the woman who died was actually Paris's mother. Now, the doctors actually diagnosed her with a seizure disorder, and one of these seizures was supposedly responsible for her driving off the bridge, but Paris believes that something weirder might be going on, and he's kind of trying to solve the mystery on his own. Meanwhile, a teenage girl named Ellie is kind of having a tough time like adjusting to her new family situation. Now, she has a mom who formerly neglected her and like had CPS called on her and shit like that. Her name is Celeste. And she's married a new man named Daniel. And she now has like a 8-year-old stepsister named Anna. Now, Celeste, the mom, has told Ellie like pretty much her entire life that it's like, oh, your dad went missing years ago. And then, you know, we had to declare him dead. Now, one day, Anna, the little girl, tries to follow Ellie to Ellie's friend's house using one of the family's little boats. Because like I said, they live on this lake, so they get around with like little skiffs and stuff. But the little girl disappears along with the boat. So obviously there's a massive search for her. And during this time, both Ellie and Paris separately start to notice some weird shit about the lake. Like there are these kind of like bizarre, unplaceable, like really loud clanging sounds. Like they can't tell where they're coming from. There are these huge dead moths that supposedly went extinct like some time ago. They see these kind of incongruous white wolves. They said, you know, we haven't had any white wolves in this area for a long time, but some people still see them. You know, there's kind of, they find this alligator in there that looks like something cut off, like one of its back legs, like surgically. It's pretty strange. And when you go into a particular part of this lake, you start having these weird hand tremors and your ears start to bleed. So the resolution of this mystery was not at all what I was expecting, which I think is what made this such an enjoyable watch. The story is very, very focused on the characters and their kind of fraught relationships and tenuous connections with one another. And that focus will actually make more sense as the details of what's going on in the lake kind of become more fleshed out. Again, it's not horror in the traditional sense, but it was definitely very eerie and very engrossing, I thought, like the mystery was. And it had excellent acting performances all around and a plot that kind of just twisted your brain. So if you like kind of mind bender type of stuff, then you should probably really dig this. So I did a longer video about the first Omen. So like I said, if you want a more in-depth take, you can go watch that. But if you don't, I'll just give a little summary here. I'm actually, like I said, I'm glad I gave this one a chance because I wasn't really expecting much from a prequel to the 1976 classic The Omen, but this film was actually really, really good. I mean, it not only honored the spirit of the original movie, but told kind of a really riveting story that easily stood on its own, you know, outside of the whole franchise. So the narrative revolves around Margaret, who's this young novitiate, and she travels to Rome in 1971 to work at an orphanage and take her final vows, like as a nun. Now, once she gets there, she kind of becomes intrigued by this older orphan girl named Carlita, who's always being punished for one thing and another, and appears to be troubled by really like terrifying visions that she draws. As the story goes on, Margaret slowly starts to realize that both she and Carlita are somehow involved in a conspiracy among this kind of breakaway Catholic sect to facilitate the birth of the Antichrist. So yeah, this was just a damn fine prequel. I mean, one of the better ones I've seen. It homaged the original and stayed consistent with all of the Omen lore, but told its own interesting story that wasn't just a rehash of what we already knew. There were also a couple of clever nods in there to iconic scenes from the 1976 film, but changed up a bit, like to subvert expectations, which I thought was kind of cool. The acting was great. The cinematography was beautiful, like really stunning. And the atmosphere was really eerie and totally in line with like the vibe of the original. Even people who hate prequels, I feel like would really like this one. It's a rare example of a prequel done right. So Alien Romulus, this was another movie that I wasn't really all that enthused about. I love Alien and Aliens, but after that, I'm just kind of meh about most of the other ones. But this one actually ended up pleasantly surprising me. This is the 7th movie in the Alien franchise, not counting the Alien vs. Predator movies. And this is one that kind of went back to basics with excellent results. So this was directed by Fede Alvarez, who also did the awesome Evil Dead reboot from 2013 and Don't Breathe from 2016, which was also great. So this movie is actually set in 2142, so it's between the events of the 1979 Alien and, Aliens from 1986. So the story focuses on a group of young people who are working for the Weyland-Yutani Corporation on this perpetually dark planet called LV-410. So our hero is a young woman named Rain Carradine, and she has a companion who's this janky older model android named Andy, who she considers a brother. Like her dad found him in the garbage or something and like fixed him up, but he's a little bit, he doesn't work exactly right. You know what I'm saying? So they decide that they're going to escape the drudgery of their lives when actually the powers that be forcibly renew their work contracts. Like they were promised freedom, like after you work X amount of hours, you can leave and go do what you want. But, they came and said, nope, never mind. They're essentially like plunging them into indentured servitude. So they're like, yeah, no, we're getting the fuck out of here. So Rain's ex-boyfriend, Tyler, and their other friends/relatives have discovered a derelict space station hovering above the planet that they live on. And so what they plan to do is they're going to steal the cryostasis equipment from that space station in order to make the 9-year journey to another planet, like outside of the system that's run by Weyland-Yutani, so they can live out there freely without the corporation breathing down their necks. This being an alien movie, however, that's not going to go the way they planned. Like the space station obviously is going to contain some unexpected cargo. In this case, a whole shit ton of face huggers and a dead xenomorph. There's also a busted up android named Rook, who is digitally modeled to look like, the late Ian Holm, who played Ash in the original Alien. Some people didn't like that, but I didn't really mind it all that much. And Ian Holm's, widow said that he would have loved it, so I'm willing to take her at her word. So Rook has some kind of nefarious intentions, at least as far as the characters are concerned. So I feel like Alien Romulus, very wisely, kept the narrative simple and action-focused, very efficiently sketched its characters in a way that got you emotionally invested in their goals and, sad when bad shit happened to them. The movie's not reinventing the wheel or anything like that, but it takes kind of all the best stuff from the Alien universe and sort of refines it down to a really tightly paced, gory, and kind of action-packed story that's entertaining all the way through. And it has plenty of nods and Easter eggs for fans of the franchise without forcing them in, other than that one line. And if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about, but you can't win them all. So Nas Veratu, this was probably my most anticipated film of the year. And I feel like it totally did not disappoint. Now, I will say that people that are not real well-versed or much interested in gothic horror and all of the melodrama that accompanies it might want to give it a pass, because it's about as gothic in the classic literature sense as a modern movie can possibly get. So I feel like an in-depth plot synopsis is probably unnecessary, obviously, because the original Nosferatu from 1922 was an unauthorized Dracula adaptation and shares most of that book's plot beats, with some differences in the character relationships and in the ending. In execution, I kind of feel like this 2024 version, of course, directed by the great Robert Eggers, somewhat resembles the 1979 Nas Veratu remake that Werner Herzog did, but also kind of flirts with the silent movie aesthetic as well. So this is mostly set in Wisborg, Germany in 1838. And the story plays a lot with the idea, and this is actually an addition, like a later edition, that the Mina equivalent, whose name is Ellen Hutter, played by Lily Rose Depp, that she has some kind of messed up romantic, erotic attraction, revulsion kind of thing going on with the Dracula equivalent, Count Orlok, who's obviously played by Bill Skarsgård. He's been visiting her in her dreams. I guess she kind of like asked for a companion or something and he showed up, you know what I mean? So, you know, ever since childhood, it's implied that she's had this dude like showing up in her dreams and it's kind of fucked up. Incidentally, I actually love the way that they portrayed Orlok in this movie. It would have been really easy to do like the rat-like Nosferatu like they did in the 1922 and the 1979 versions. But in this movie, the vampire looks like a very powerful but very plague-ridden and corpsey looking Vlad Tepes. Like he has the mustache and the Valachian duds and everything like that. It's a really great, unique look. And I love how he did his voice. Like Bill Skarsgård, I guess he apparently went to like an opera singer and learned how to like lower his voice an octave. So he has like this really, really great voice with this really thick Romanian accent. And it sounds like it's coming from everywhere around you. Like whenever he talks, it's like pretty awesome. So yeah, I mean, we get the familiar story of the Jonathan Harker analog, whose name is Thomas Hutter, who's played by Nicholas Hoult, getting sent into the wilds of Eastern Europe to help Count Orlok purchase some property in Wisborg. All the better to get close to Thomas's wife, Ellen, who is the woman who somehow magically kind of like awakened him from his long slumber. You know what I mean? Because it's implied that she has some kind of psychic gift or something like that he responded to. We also get our Van Helsing stand-in, whose name is Professor Albin Eberhard von Franz, who's played by Willem Dafoe. And he's kind of the first one to figure out what's going on, you know, vis-a-vis the whole vampire curse situation. So yeah, this movie looks gorgeous and just goes all in on this lush, very oppressive, like gothic atmosphere. It's a really immersive experience. Like it made me feel like it was inside it, like the whole time I was watching it. The acting performances are also amazing. Skarsgård is the obvious standout, and Willem Dafoe is great in this too. He doesn't really show up until like later on in the movie, but he just, you know, steals pretty much every scene he's in. He actually provides a little bit of levity to what is otherwise a very, very serious movie. I will say the movie is kind of languidly paced. It does take some time to build up this very dreary, nightmarish mood, but I kind of feel like fans of old school gothic horror should love it. I mean, it just perfectly encapsulates all the best aspects of the genre. And, you know, like I said, easily one of the best movies of the year, one of the best vampire movies of all time. So Strange Darling. This is a visually stunning thriller. It actually debuted in 2023, but didn't get a wide release until about a year later, so I'm still counting it as a 2024 movie. This was another one I did like a long form video on, so like I said, if you want a more in-depth thing, you can watch that one, but otherwise I'll just give like a little brief summary. So this is told as a story in 6 chapters, plus an epilogue, so technically 7 chapters, I guess. So the narrative is actually presented out of order, a little bit like Pulp Fiction in that way. And it's presented that way so it will subvert audience expectations about what's happening. We're actually led to believe that this is like a very straightforward serial killer cat and mouse kind of story, which it kind of is, except in ways that it's not. Now, purportedly based on the last few murders of a 2021 killing spree, but not really. It's not really based on a true story. They're just doing a Texas Chainsaw Massacre deal. The film features just essentially 2 characters. There's one called the Lady and a man called the Demon. Now, at the beginning of the film, which is actually chapter 3, we see an injured lady, like kind of fleeing through the woods, being pursued by the Demon, this man, who's driving a pickup truck and armed with a rifle and is like shooting at her. Now, from this setup, we think we know what's happening. But that's where Strange Darling fools you. And it kind of lures you into complacency, like using your knowledge of familiar thriller tropes before kind of pulling the rug out from under you, right? Like, suffice it to say that nothing is as it seems in this movie. And though I will admit that I had some misgivings about the possibly unintentional messaging of the film, I do kind of feel like the style of it and the surprises in this one, like, more than made up for any doubts that I had about it. It's a really, really good, like very engaging thriller. And it's just constantly heading off in refreshing directions that you don't expect. And it looks bloody great to boot. And honestly, I was surprised to learn that the cinematography on this was done by the famous actor Giovanni Ribisi. And this is his first cinematography gig. So man, go Giovanni. So Oddity, this is another one that I reviewed before, like did a longer video. This movie, I kind of feel like this just kind of came out of nowhere and then quietly became one of the best loved supernatural horror movies of the entire year. It's kind of crazy. So this was directed by Damian McCarthy, whose debut film called Caveat came out in 2020, I believe. Oddity is an Irish ghost story / murder mystery. And it does everything just right. And honestly, this movie has one of the best, most dread-inducing opening sequences that I can remember for like a long, long time. So the general story centers around this kind of spooky psychic woman named Darcy, whose twin sister Danny is horribly murdered at this remote farmhouse that she's been renovating with her husband Ted. Now, Ted is a psychiatrist at a hospital for the criminally insane, and it's believed that one of his patients killed Danny like shortly after he was released from the hospital. So a year after the murder, Darcy turns up at the now finished farmhouse where Ted is living with his new girlfriend, whose name is Yana. Now, Darcy ostensibly wants to reconnect with Ted and kind of sort through their grief about Danny now that a year has passed. But it's clear that Darcy might also maybe have another agenda. Judging by the extremely creepy life-size wooden man that she gives this couple as a gift. So I feel like this was like the perfect classic ghost story. It was really eerie, very atmospheric, had a couple of jump scares, but they were very, very well earned, and just had just chilling vibes like for days. It seems like, I don't know, like it seems like it should be easy to make something as simple and as creepy and scary as this. But when you see an excellent film like Oddity and compare it to other ones like this, you realize just what a rare fucking treat this movie is. It's just, it does everything correctly. I still haven't heard anyone who's seen this say a single bad word about it. And believe me, there's a reason that this has pretty much universal acclaim. If you love like old school ghost story, supernatural murder mystery stuff, definitely see this one because it's great. So Cuckoo, and yeah, you guessed it, I did a long form review of this one as well. So like I said, you can go watch that video too if you want a longer form thing of it. Now, this movie, I kind of feel like it's not nearly as divisive as, Longlegs was, but I still feel like this is one of those movies that you either really vibed with or you really didn't. And I kind of feel like even people who did like it, like just dug the first 2/3 of it, but felt like it fell apart in the third act or went too far or got too weird or something like that. I don't agree, but everyone's entitled to their opinion. My opinion is that I fucking loved every minute of this weird-ass movie. So this was directed by a German filmmaker, Tillman Singer, and this movie is about a 17-year-old girl named Gretchen, and she's kind of forced to move to Germany with her estranged father and her stepmother and her younger half-sister, like after her mother dies. So this family ends up at this kind of remote resort compound type of thing, spa, whatever the hell it is, hotel kind of. So they move out there because the dad is helping the owner of the place like build a new resort nearby. So they all have to move there and live at this compound. Now, almost immediately, shit starts to get strange. For example, there are a couple of occasions where women just randomly vomit in the front lobby. There are these really odd noises seeming to emanate from the surrounding woods. Gretchen's mute sister Alma starts having seizures, which seem to be caused by this horrible high-pitched screeching sound, which is coming from God knows where. Now, Gretchen eventually teams up with a former cop to figure out what the hell is going on with this place, because there is something weird going on in this place. And in particular, they're trying to figure out the clearly very sketchy agenda of the resort's owner, whose name is Herr Kunisch. So yeah, this was bizarre and unsettling, and I adored it. It really leaned into this peculiar premise that it had and just went full speed ahead. You know what I mean? The mystery of the resort, like when it's resolved, is admittedly, it's pretty out there. And a tad convoluted. I want to say it's not hard to figure out or anything like that. But as I said, I really, really like audacious like stories like this that just are like, fuck it and just let their freak flag fly. I'm like into that. So yeah, this is definitely not for everyone, but I thought it was fantastic. So yeah, here we are getting into the top 3. So these top 3 will probably surprise no one that that watch this channel with any regularity. So this here, Heretic. So this was another movie that just wrung all of this suspense from just a few characters in a house. You know what I mean? Which is, I love when a movie can do that. I mean, this movie was like far, far better than I was expecting. And I was already expecting it to be really good. Like from the trailers and everything like that. I was like, wow, that looks, but it was like way better than I thought. I'm going to say I feel like the trailer, though, was a little bit deceptive, which I guess a lot of trailers are these days. And actually, I don't mind that they do that because it's like if the trailer showed everything and why go see the movie? You know what I mean? If they kind of are going to make you think it's going to go this way, but then it kind of surprises you and go that. So it doesn't really bother me. I kind of feel like it made Heretic look almost like an escape room type of scenario, but it's not really like that. It's actually kind of more a cerebral like battle of wills, kind of like concerning the nature of faith. And it also had like a lot of really gruesome violence in it. So that was a plus. So this was written and directed by Scott Beck and Brian Woods, who were the team responsible for writing the screenplay for A Quiet Place. And they also wrote and directed that movie Haunt, which is actually quite good if you haven't seen it. The movie Heretic follows 2 Mormon missionaries, one of whom is kind of a more cynical, world-weary girl named Sister Barnes, and the other one is kind of a more naive girl named Sister Paxton. So the 2 of them have a lead on a guy who seemingly wants to hear their little religious spiel or whatever. So there's kind of a brief sequence at the beginning where we just kind of get to know them, and then the girls head over to the isolated cottage where this dude lives. So the man who opens the door is named Mr. Reed, and he's played by Hugh Grant, who is really playing brilliantly against his usual persona here. And I kind of feel like he's totally deserving of like all the award nominations that he's got for this. I mean, he should totally win something for he's amazing. So Mr. Reed seems quite delightful, quite friendly at first. And he's really interested, seemingly, in learning about the Mormon faith. So he invites the girls inside. His wife's making some blueberry pie, he says. And of course, they're initially reluctant because they actually aren't allowed to be in a house with an unattached male. But Mr. Reed's like, no, it's fine. Like, my wife is here, and everything is hunky-dory, you know what I mean? So girls are still kind of a little wary, but they're like, okay, I guess that's all right. And they go into the house. And from then on, things get more and more uncomfortable as it becomes clear that Mr. Reed has some unknown agenda, and not the obvious one that you might be picturing. He actually starts by questioning aspects of the girl's religion, like not in a hostile way, but just like a genuinely curious kind of way, like asking how they feel about certain things about it. And honestly, in fact, I think this is one of the most effective things about his character and why his character is so sinister, because he never comes across as hostile or angry or anything like that. He always seems very polite and very friendly, even when he's doing like really messed up shit. So his questions slowly get kind of more awkward and more invasive. And the girls are actually, they're getting nervous, but they're actually quite surprised by how much Mr. Reed knows about religions in general. Like, he's a religious scholar. His house is just full of books on all different faiths, and he just has all of this stuff about him, like, just at his fingertips, However, by the time that the girls realize that they might be in danger and need to get the hell out of Dodge, they're essentially trapped inside the house and are kind of forced to play by Mr. Reed's bizarre rules in order to maybe have a chance of getting out. So yeah, this was just a phenomenal, like, psychological horror film. It kind of delved into religious faith as a concept and, posed a lot of questions for viewers to ponder about, particularly about the meaning of the ending, which could be read in a couple of different ways. And I'm going to say too, it would have been very easy to make the Mormon characters like cliched or kind of objects of ridicule, but Heretic actually portrays him as very complex, intelligent, very principled, and, quite heroic, like toward the end. Now, the movie doesn't really take a stance one way or the other on, whether God exists or which religion is the correct one or anything like that, but it does kind of explore these issues in like really interesting ways, while also at the same time being like a really tense kind of cat and mouse game between these 2 innocent young women and this, quite frightening man with motives that are unclear. You know what I'm saying? Honestly, as soon as I was done watching this, I wanted to watch it again. And I immediately knew as soon as it was over that this was going to easily be in my top 5 of the year. And here it is at number 3. So, The Substance. This fucking movie, man. This thing absolutely blew me away. And it just, I don't know, man. Like, we saw this twice, like in the theater. This actually made me just chortle with glee at how ballsy, how disgusting, like how amazing, how batshit insane this movie is. It's something. Now, I kind of feel like a lot of movies can maybe become victims of their own hype, which I think is something that happened to Longlegs. But this one deserved all the hype it got and then some. So this was written and directed by Coralie Fargia. She also did the excellent 2017 film Revenge, which is a rape revenge movie. And if you haven't seen that, you really should. It's great. But The Substance revolves around kind of an aging celebrity named Elizabeth Sparkle. And she's played just by Demi Moore in a fearless performance. Like I said, I'd be shocked if she didn't get some awards for this. So Elizabeth gets shit canned from her gig on a TV fitness show. It's like aerobics or whatever. When she hits her 50th birthday. You know what I mean? She's over the hill. So her revolting pig of a producer is played by Dennis Quaid, who actually looks like he's having the time of his life, being as repugnant as possible. He's also a lot of fun in this. He's kind of saying, well, he just wants a hot young thing to take Elizabeth's place. And there's a whole scene where Elizabeth overhears him kind of like laughing about what a disgusting old bat she is. Even though she's clearly still beautiful and in awesome shape for, supposedly she's 50 in the movie, but the actress Demi Moore was actually 61 in this movie, but she still looks fucking fantastic. Now, after Elizabeth is involved in kind of a minor car accident, there's this impossibly good-looking dude who's a nurse at the hospital, and he slips her a thumb drive while telling her that she'd be a good candidate. Now, she's kind of curious. She gets home, she watches the video that's on this thumb drive, and it turns out to be a promo for some presumably black market youth serum, she's guessing, called The Substance. Now, the promo is very vague about how it works, and Elizabeth kind of thinks the whole thing is probably bullshit, so she just tosses it out. However, as time goes on and more indignities befall her, she sort of gets desperate, and she eventually calls the number, like in the ad. And then there's this mysterious voice that sent her to some shady back alley somewhere, like, but that you go through like all of this like shadiness, and then there's this weirdly pristine room in there that has like all these lockers. So she picks up her kit and goes home with it. So the long and short of it is that The Substance makes a genetic copy of you, only younger and hotter. The copy literally sprouts, fully formed and adult, out of your back. And according to the materials that come with the kit, you and the clone are one. You're like the same person. There are a bunch of rules, though. Like, the clone gets 7 days to run around, like, while the host is lying kind of in stasis, being fed through an IV. And then the original, gets the next 7 days, and you have to keep alternating like that, like, in order to, like, strike a perfect balance. So Elizabeth Clone, who calls herself Sue, and is played by Margaret Qualley, is just drop-dead gorgeous. And she goes and auditions for the spot on Elizabeth's show and easily wins it and becomes, like, a huge megastar. Now, soon enough, as you might imagine, problems begin to arise as Elizabeth starts to become jealous of Sue's looks and her, burgeoning success. And Sue starts to become impatient with having to switch places with, what she considers this tired old bag, every other week. Now, Sue gradually begins stealing more time from Elizabeth, which actually causes Elizabeth to physically deteriorate in very grotesque ways. And the whole situation, because I'm watching it going, where the fuck can they possibly go with this? Oh, they went somewhere, all right. Like, it all ends with this impossibly over the top and just amazingly awesome spectacle of an ending that just has to be seen to be believed. I feel like some people thought it was too much. I did not. I thought it was fabulous. So although the movie does tackle some serious issues about, women's value in Hollywood, being, entirely predicated on their youth and their beauty, and, the crippling self-hatred that many women feel because of this, once they feel like they're over the hill or whatever, the movie, takes care to remember that it's still a horror movie and it delivers on that big time. Like, don't go into this thinking that it's just some fun, weird flick or whatever. This is body horror with a capital BH. And honestly, several people in the theater with me were clearly not ready for how gnarly this thing gets at times. And actually, I have a friend who's really into horror but doesn't like gore. And she went to see it not knowing, because she was like talking to me about it and her eyes were all big. And she was sitting there going, did you? I didn't know it was good. You know what I mean? She was like really upset. So like I said, if you're squeamish, you might want to skip it because it really does go there. It's like, it's pretty nasty. But yeah, it's really something to behold. I was just delighted by every what the fuck minute of this. It had great visuals, like just fantastic gore effects. You know, the acting performance is just stunning, totally award worthy. And it just had this crazy, crazy premise that I feel like would do David Cronenberg proud. I mean, this was an epic, epic film. And just as soon as I saw it, I was like, that is an instant classic. And here it is, my number one, which I don't think will surprise anyone. Late Night with the Devil. Now, ever since I first saw this in the theater back in March of 2024, I knew that it would probably be my favorite movie of the year. Like, I just fell in love with it. Now, I saw a bunch of movies subsequently that came close to taking that crown, like The Substance, for instance. But in the end, Late Night with the Devil still reigns supreme as my number one most beloved movie of 2024. It just, like I said, it just kind of captured my heart from the very first frame and just didn't let it go all year long. It probably doesn't hurt that I also have a little bit of a crush on David Desmalchian. He totally rocks, and he just like carries this movie to glory. He's fantastic in this. Now, this is technically a found footage film, but it's a rare one that actually has a refreshing take on the genre. So this was actually written and directed by Colin and Cameron Cairns, and is presented as a lost Halloween episode of a 1970s late night talk show. Now, this is a similar premise to the 2013 film WNUF Halloween Special, which I also reviewed on my channel. But this movie is about 1,000,000 times better than that one. You know what I mean? That one's okay, but this one just blows it out of the water. Like, everything about the aesthetic of Late Night with the Devil just made me deliriously happy. And the filmmakers and the actors just like absolutely nailed the whole vibe of a talk show from this era. Because I'm old, I remember this shit. I mean, right down to like all the fucking wide collar suits and all the lame jokes and everything like that. It was just perfect. So David Desmalchian plays Jack Delroy, and he hosts a show called Night Owls that's actually second in the ratings only to, Johnny Carson's Tonight Show, which if you're a kid was a real show back then, like the most popular nighttime show. Now, at one point, his wife, Madeline, dies of cancer, and Jack actually takes a hiatus from the program. There are also kind of hints of larger occult themes at play, like Jack's involvement with The Grove, which is obviously a reference to Bohemian Grove. Look that up if you don't know what it is. And also has some allusions to like a satanic cult's mass suicide, which kind of plays into the plot later on. So the ratings of Night Owls have kind of been tanking since Jack's return after his wife died. So he gets an idea to do something big for the Halloween special, like essentially planning to do an entire show based around the occult. So he brings on as guests like this kind of famous medium called Christou. He also has this very condescending skeptic and magician whose name is Carmichael Haig, who's playing a very exaggerated version of the real life magician and skeptic James Randi, who was often on these nighttime talk shows back in the day. And most importantly, he brings on a parapsychologist named June Ross Mitchell, who has written a book detailing her work with this young girl named Lily, who she claims is possessed by a demon. Now, Jack, who has also been sleeping with June, we discover, is hoping that they can summon this demon live on TV to, get those ratings up into the stratosphere. It's sweeps week. So the tape of the show goes pretty much the way a 1970s late night talk show would go, at least initially. So Christou, the medium, is on first, and he does some kind of not very convincing cold reading techniques. And then the skeptic guy points out how bullshit it all was, and, Before Christou leaves the stage, though, he seems to kind of get sick, and then he makes a psychic pronouncement that appears to rattle the host, like Jack Delroy. However, the show must go on, and we then cut to a commercial break. Now, one great touch that this movie had was showing what was going on behind the scenes of Night Owls, like during the commercial breaks, like when the audience presumably would have been seeing commercials. And I feel like this didn't hamper like the reality of the found footage aspect, like it didn't take you out of the universe of the film, because the movie is actually structured as though it's a documentary about this lost episode of the show. So it has like an opening narration, which like explains the context of the episode and gives a bit of backstory about Jack Delroy and all of that. So it's not weird to like cut to black and white handheld footage of backstage stuff. We just assume that somebody was filming behind the scenes, like to document this special, which they were hoping would just be this big iconic thing that would get their ratings back where they wanted them. So anyway, the shit really starts to hit the fan when Dr. June and Lily are brought out. Now, the actress playing Lily is incredible. She is like super cute and sweet and polite, but she is creepy as all get out. And I can't explain what it is. It's just the way she looks at the camera. I don't know. She's super fucking creepy. So they talk a little bit about the demon possession, like the demon that's inside of her or whatever. But of course, like the skeptic Carmichael just rips them a new asshole and like insults them for like entertaining this nonsense or whatever. Now, Jack eventually convinces June to do a session with the demon, like, against her better judgment. She's like, I really don't think this is a good idea. We shouldn't be doing this on TV. Like, you know, something could go really bad. But he's like, no, come on, like ratings. So she finally, you know, grudgingly, like she agrees to do it. Now, so they do it and some kind of crazy shit occurs. Now, Carmichael steps in after this demonstration, and he wants to show how easy it could have been faked by doing like essentially kind of a mass hypnosis type of thing. So there's this like a fantastic sequence that kind of makes us question whether what we're seeing in the movie is what really happened. And then after this, like the episode like ends in just a balls to the wall, like supernatural shit show. And it's just like a total bloodbath. And later on, like in a little bit of a, like an epilogue, there are kind of like some troubling revelations about Jack Delroy's former dealings with the occult and how he might have been behind what happened on the show. So I watched Late Night with the Devil for a second time on Shudder on Halloween night, and I loved it even more the second time than I had the first time when I saw it in the theater. Everything about this movie like hit just right for me. Like just from the spot on like 70s look of the show to this immersive nature that it had to, you know, David Dastmalchian's like just sensational like lead performance. I loved this movie like unreservedly and completely. And honestly, I will likely watch it every Halloween, probably for the rest of my life. I mean, I feel like this was a brilliant film and just perfect in every way, at least in my opinion. So yeah, that is my exhaustive list of my 20 favorite horror movies this year. I'm sure you guys have some thoughts about it, so please leave them in the comments if you want to start a discussion. And that will do it for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and all of that business. And I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.